Madam Deputy Speaker, I Resolution Bill 2015. And before I start, can I congratulate the member for Brisbane Central on her elevation not only to the ministry but as Minister for Multicultural Affairs. I know you have a great passion for it, and I know you'll be a great minister. Madam Deputy Speaker, the legislation we have before us today is something that I have a bit of a problem with. I don't think that there's a person in this House that isn't entirely committed to a culturally diverse Queensland, isn't entirely committed to making sure that every newly arrived migrant or refugee gets a start in our great state. Just to set the grounding, at the moment in Queensland we have a state that's made up of something like 200 different cultures. They speak something like 220 different languages. There's 100 different religious or belief systems that are practiced in this state. About 1 in 5 Queenslanders are born overseas. Sometimes I look around this parliament and think it's a bit of a shame that the parliament doesn't reflect the diversity of modern-day Queensland, and I particularly include in that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, where I want to go in my short contribution today is to look at the bill and look at some of the disappointing parts of it from my point of view. My problem is that it says nothing in substance, it enforces nothing, it doesn't promote much, it does nothing to make the lives of migrants and refugees in Queensland any better. When we were in government, we surveyed the sector pretty well, and we found no enthusiasm throughout the sector for legislation. As a matter of fact, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is the third time this piece of legislation has come before the House. The first time was in the dying days of the Bligh government, when the then Multicultural Affairs Minister, now Premier, introduced it. The Parliament was prorogued, and that was the end of the bill at that point. The now Premier reintroduced the bill as a private member's bill in the last Parliament, and it was rejected, and we're here again today to have a look at it. In my travels around the state, spent a lot of time with newly arrived migrants and refugees. And some of the most worthwhile things that I did was an association with those people, those sectors across the state. And all they want is not a piece of paper that is passed by this Parliament that says we all believe in multiculturalism or a culturally diverse Queensland. All they want is a bit of a leg up and a job and something that they can aim for that will give them, and hopefully in time their family, a bit of a start. The bill that we have before us, and I'd ask members particularly to go to clause 6 of the bill, because if you go through clause 6, it specifically states what the bill doesn't create. It doesn't create any new rights or impose legally enforceable obligations on the state, the minister, a member of the advisory council, a government entity, or anyone else. Or it doesn't create a civil cause for action if a provision was contravened, and failure to comply with the bill would not affect the validity of any decision. In other words, there is a lot of goals in here, there are a lot of good words in here, but at the end of the day, there is nothing as part of this legislation that reinforces, via the action plan that the government intends to bring in, some background, some teeth that will enforce what it is that this bill is trying to do. In essence, what this bill does do is reinvent some of the things that are already in existence. It creates a new multicultural policy where a cultural diversity policy already exists. It creates a new multicultural action plan where a cultural diversity action plan already exists. It changes the name of the Cultural Diversity Roundtable to the Multicultural Queensland Advisory Council. And again, one of the disappointing things that I saw about the Advisory Council is that it meets only twice a year. So by the time you've had your first meeting in January, by the time you get to the end of you're due for the second one, it's Christmas drink time. The body that we had in government was a body that we brought in and met probably, I would think the average would be about every 6 weeks. And we sat down, Robert Cavalici, who was the Assistant Minister at the time, and I pay my due regard to Robert and the work that he did in this field. We sat down and we spoke and listened to the round table that we had in all manner of things, government policy, grants, the whole thing. So there is an opportunity, I think, for this round table probably to meet more frequently than it does and provide a lot more advice of substance to the Minister. The cultural diversity policy that I was talking about isn't a political document, and it's here. The action plan is also here. They're not there as something that enforces LNP policy in any way, shape or form. They are documents that came about as a result of an enormous amount of talking and consulting that went across the state, and they came about as something that we were very proud of. In the action plan, there's something like 170 different actions that require government departments to produce, and we intended to hold them to account if they didn't. The important part about the policy, and wherever I went, and the action plan, wherever I went, was to make very clear that it was a living document, it was a living policy. It wasn't intended that it would be bound and put in leather and put on a shelf somewhere. It was something that we would change as circumstances and time demanded that it should be done. I also want to spend just a little bit of time talking about the grants process, and I heard the Minister talk about one of the partnerships that she has formed with MDA, Multicultural Development Association. Kieran Benson is a fantastic woman. I had a lot to do with Kieran in my time, and I congratulate the Minister for coming up with this plan that I think was 500 trainees that we're looking at. The thing that we can do, and the thing that I think we started to do pretty successfully in the last government, was to form those partnerships, not so much in our case with trainees, but to forge the partnerships with business, and to get them to sign on the bottom line. We had lots of agreements around the place that required businesses to take on refugees and put them into the workplace so that they could earn $1 and start to make their way in life. So anything that can be done, Minister, as part of that process, not just trainees, not just traineeships, but good, solid jobs. When you look at someone from Afghanistan in the eyes, and they're working at the meatworks in Rockhampton, doing a job that most Australians wouldn't even dream of doing, and you ask them how long they've been there, and they tell you that they've been there for 3 or 4 years, and you ask them where their wife and children are, and they're back in Afghanistan, and why are you working? They're working because they want to save the money and reunite their family, and they will continue to work in a job that I wouldn't consider doing. But such is their commitment to it, and many of their fellow employees in those meatworks, that one of the things that happened as a result was that the number of job placements and so forth that were happening in those particular works was falling away to almost nothing because they had a very stable workforce. Madam Deputy Speaker, one of the things that we need to do, as I said, is job creation. Newly arrived migrants and refugees generally won't know that this legislation has even been passed. They won't know. What they will know is that if there were concrete steps made by the Parliament of Queensland to give them a start in life, then that will be
time has expired. I call the member for Stratton.
Thank you, Madam